Hello, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast. I'm Justin Sloan.
And I'm Paul Zeidman, and I'd like to introduce our special guest, writer across many mediums and just all-around Renaissance man, Ross Berger. Thanks for coming on the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're excited. You actually were a guest on the old show, I believe.
That's right.
Creative Writing Career, probably, right?
That's right. I think, Justin, you and I think I connected. I had just done some work for Meta for when the virtual reality headset first came out. I wrote the launch title called Farlands.
Yep.
Talking about VR a lot back then.
Yeah, I do remember that because I was super excited about all this VR stuff, and I still am. I'm using it for fitness occasionally, mostly, but it's fun. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I still am. You know, the possibilities are endless. It's just when it can be adopted properly for everybody to love and appreciate.
Yeah, I saw that on side note. I saw that the Pro now, the what do you call it? The Oculus is now the whatever it is only $1,000 now. They dropped the price 500, and I'm like, oh, I'm so tempted because it'd be nice to get rid of that extra layer of heviness. But
and notice you say only $1,000.
Yeah, only $1,000.
Yeah, who needs things like food and clothes for my children?
Right,
yeah?
Right.
Yeah, it's like a 10.
I gotta say, it did surprise me in the early days, in the lower depths of the subprime mortgage crisis when the iPad came out in 2009. I was like, no one's going to buy this because it's just a larger iPhone.
Yeah.
And yet I couldn't even walk into the Apple stores. The lines were so huge.
I still think those are dumb. Like our kids have them, and then we got them the Kindle Fires for $74. And the Kindle Fire is as good, if not better, in my opinion. It's $74, $1,000. But people love the brand, so whatever.
Sorry, yeah, I think we've got two old iPads that are just kind of gathering dust in a back room right now because we had them, we used them for a bit, and then just kind of like, well, then I got my phone, and then I got a computer. So well, why do I need this tablet?
Yeah.
So we digress, right? Yes. Before we jump in, we always, like he said, do like a what have we been watching or listening to or reading. I'll throw a reading one out there because we don't do those enough. I'm reading Deep Shadow by Nick Sullivan. It's one of these kind of sea adventure stuff because I'm working on a cool pilot that is related to this. And I found out my cousin is actually, I've always kind of known that he's like an expert diver, but I didn't know he had some work involved in this kind of like security space involved with diving and whatnot. So he's been giving me some insight. So I'm having a lot of fun and doing my research.
Wow.
Very cool. I've got two things. The first one is about so mid-January, I did my screenwriting presentation for the East Bay branch of the California Writers Club, and there was a writer there who was also on the docket, but he had to leave before I got there. But he left me his book. It's called Wings Over Normandy by Harry Gale Michaels. It's a fictionalized account of a pilot and a B-26 and all of the missions that he flew in World War II. It's a very short read, but it was entertaining. I also love to talk to him. May try to invite him on as a guest to talk about this because I'm sure he did a lot of research. It's it gets into a little technical about the planes themselves and also about the missions and also just it all leads up to the D-Day invasion. So I love that kind of stuff. So that was cool. And I had to fly out of town this weekend, and on the flight back, I watched 3,000 Years of Longing, which was a George Miller movie from last year with Idris Elba. Oh god, and I'm blanking on the actress's name, but basically this kind of bookish professor finds a genie's lamp and sets the genie free, and they have this long discussion about what's her wish going to be, and she's convinced that he's a trickster, and he goes on to tell all these stories about how he ended up in the bottle or trapped in the bottle several times over the past millennia. And it was okay. It's George Miller, so of Mad Max fame, so it's visually great, but the story just was kind of plodded along. I was really surprised that they probably could have done one more pass on it to make it a little more interesting, and a couple of twists and turns that were unexpected. But overall, I'm glad I saw it, but I'm glad I saw it on a plane because that's pretty much the perfect venue for watching that kind of thing. Screen about yay big.
I'm embarrassed to say I finally saw Road Warrior over the summer on HBO Max. My God, that blew me away. I'm shocked. I felt like, how have I been malnourished? That's such a visually stunning, such a creative, cinematic piece of art.
So wait, so the Road Warrior, the one with Mel Gibson?
Correct, 1982.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you seen Fury Road?
I didn't. I know.
Okay. You thought Road Warrior was good? Fury Road is going to blow your mind.
I heard. I know. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't see that as either. For some reason, I guess I just had too much diet of the dystopian stuff. I think, like, for whatever reason, I didn't get a chance to see it when I was a kid. because it was on HBO really late at night, and
Sure.
I usually fell asleep right before I got to it. So it just was one of those things that passed over. And then Mel Gibson to me is Lethal Weapon, but that's naive me. So it's Road Warrior.
Yeah, I highly suggest going watching Fury Road. I think, and watch it on the biggest screen that you can find.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, it's awesome.
I heard, yeah, from several different sources. I heard it's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So is that your what you've been listening to or watching lately, or do you have another one?
No, I got a bunch of stuff. I mean, before the end of the year, I was writing a video game, or I'm still doing so now, that has a kind of like a children-centric type of world to it. So I wanted to read as many classically good children's novels going back to over 100 years. So Wind in the Willows, which was, I have to say, not only one of the greatest children's literary artworks I've ever read, but probably one of the best books I've ever read. The Toad character is absolutely phenomenal, and is probably a very relatable character that we can all see based upon the various different narcissists we've seen in our culture. And Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, which I remember as a kid through the play version, but reading it is a much different experience. And having read E.B. White's work beforehand through nonfiction accounts, it's actually so well structurally taught. And like the very first beginning, where they're talking about the potential death of the pig, just that looming over your entire reading experience, was surprising for me to read that as it was dated in 1950, how kids would respond to that. I don't think today you can get away with that. Having read other kinds of children's book authors of today, which I don't find nearly as compelling as those works. And I'm in the middle of 3 or 4 other kinds of novels along the way. Some have been a little bit slower than others. I'm trying to read as much Cormac McCarthy as I can right now, because his last 2 books just came out in December. So I just finished No Country for Old Men. Having loved the movie and read the book, which I like the film a little bit better, but I love his work. I think he's an absolutely phenomenal author. And I'm watching Last of Us, which I'm sure you've probably discussed with a lot of your podcasts. And Party Down season 3, after a 13-year reprieve, has finally come back. And it's very funny so far. The last 2 episodes, very funny show.
Awesome. There we go. Cool. Well, let's dive into you. So yeah, as you mentioned, we actually talked back in the day, 2014 probably, on the Creative Writing Career podcast, which was the predecessor to this. And you had just come out with a cool VR title. And since then, you've done a lot of other fun games. And at some point before that, you did TV. And it looks like you've done some TV after that as well.
Interactive TV.
Oh, interactive TV. Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
So would you call that like hybrid TV, or is that real TV, or how does that fall into that category?
I mean, it's a great way of saying it. It's so The Runner was an exclusive for the Verizon network called Go 90.
Okay.
Go 90 is no longer in existence. I think it was around for about 3 or 4 years, and prior to that, it was an Intel property.
Okay.
So Verizon started going in there, taking a lot of older IP that was in development limbo for a while. And The Runner, which had been around, I think, since 2000, and then again in 2005, there wasn't enough good technology to actually actualize it, to realize it, until 2016, 2015 rolled around, where the cell phone was just that much more advanced than it was beforehand, where you can not only, move the story forth, because the idea is there's a invisible or anonymous runner who's going across the United States, and you have 6 teams of 2 trying to track down this runner before anybody else can reach them. And then if you are able to identify the runner or get to the runner's specific locale before everybody else can, then a runner is replaced. And then you start again in that locale in which you found them. The person or the team that found that runner would be rewarded with a bunch of money, and they could continue on. What they did was, instead of just making this just about the teams, they wanted to have an at-home experience.
Yeah.
So you could play the runner by giving good clues and information, by tracking whatever you could in the locale, whatever you could see what was going on, the hunches of what was going on, whatever the teams were putting out there, whatever the show was putting out there, give some information about the locale. If that information was deemed as high quality, those teams would make a recommendation for you to receive a reward that day, meaning like $100, $500, maybe even $1,000, right? There was an additional experience to that too, which was the leaderboard experience. Whereas even if you're not contributing to giving information to the teams who are trying to catch the runner, but you're promoting the show in a highly spirited way, and you get a lot of likes, you get a lot of retweets, all that adds up to leaderboard data. And those in the top 5 or the top 15 at the end of 35 days, because that's how long the experience took, or 30 days, that's how long the experience took, you would be rewarded anything from, I believe, $25,000 to $1,000. $25,000 if you got the most likes and retweets. Then it goes 10, 5 for second and third. And then if you were in the top 10 thereafter, or the top 12 thereafter, you'd get $1,000. So it was just this confluence of different types of experience. You had the reality show, you had the participation within the reality show, and then you had the pure at-home experience where you're just trying to create greater excitement for the show. So 3 different parts, and they all work together in some form or another. So when I was brought on early on, I helped design how that experience works out, from, you know, how are these different mechanisms work along the way. And then once the show was working, I was overlooking certain kind of digital assets to make sure that the show and the digital experience and the at-home experience were all working together, because if something slightly goes amiss, then the whole show goes out of whack.
Yeah, so a good example of one of these hybrid / interactive new media, maybe kind of TV experiences. We had one that we had done with DJ2 and Genvid called Rival Peak, and then in more recent couple games they've been doing in that same regard that on IMDb are titled TV, but yeah, they're really like these hybrid weird things that are like a whole new thing. Right. So then you also have a few books that are out. I'll mention right now: Storytelling for New Technologies and Platforms, Writer's Guides to Theme Parks, Virtual Reality, Board Games, Virtual Assistants, and more. Yep. And dramatic storytelling and narrative design, a writer's guide to video games and transmedia. And that's all really awesome. And then also what it caught my attention too is that you had posted, I think, that you were starting to teach at USC, and that's pretty cool and something I wanted to hit on. So lots of stuff to dive in on that. Did you want to give your little bio of anything I might have missed, or just another little hello to the audience?
I mean, sure. Basically, how I got into this world, into the video game and transmedia world, was through television. I had a small little stint with Law and Order and ABC Daytime, and that's what propelled me to move out to Los Angeles. And prior to that, I was a playwright in New York, having worked with several different off Broadway companies, and having really understanding immediate feedback on your work if an audience doesn't get it in a live space. You know, it's one of the greatest lessons you can ever have. But when I came out to Los Angeles in 2006, it was a year before the impending writer's strike. And then no one was hiring new writers or folks that they didn't know. So when their strike actually hit, I had already been working in the emerging media world, like creating digital content for YouTube. And I worked on one of the big shows at the time, which was called Lonely Girl 15, which was a Webby award-winning ARG / show on YouTube and various different kinds of platforms. And that opened my eyes up to how you tell stories within new emerging technologies, that being YouTube. Because no one wants to necessarily be there for 30 minutes to an hour. Sometimes they just want 5 minutes. And that was a radical adjustment for me as a storyteller. And upon that, then I just started focusing on different technologies, different ways to tell stories. And I wound up with different publishers along the way in video games, including Microsoft, Electronic Arts, Meta, Amazon, though not in gaming, but more so in chatbot creation. So I've done some of that work as well too, outside of the entertainment space.
Really cool. I think I'll let Paul dive in, because then we can start with like the high level. He always has the higher level, what is a video game kind of questions.
Because as we've well established on this program, is that, you know, Justin's got a lot of knowledge about the things that I don't. So he's very familiar with writing for video games, and I don't. So I mean, how does one get involved with writing for video games? We've talked about it before, but like, what is your story of how you got involved? And I want to touch on this in a little bit, that you were talking before about writing on various platforms. Yeah. And that you mentioned, I believe earlier or before we started, about transmedia. Is that kind of like the same thing? Transmedia just across different kinds of media? Whichever one you want to answer first.
Sure. If the story or the universe or the franchise is traveling across different media platforms, and particularly if you want to tell a holistic story or holistic experience, and each of those platforms tells a different fragment of that story or reveals a different part of that experience, that's what I would call transmedia storytelling or transmedia franchise development. If you're just choosing a random technology and want to tell a story through it, that would not qualify as transmedia, because it's not going across a different medium. It's staying in its singular or I should say insular platform in that case.
So just as an example, that'd be like if you had like the Walking Dead TV show, and then someone wrote a video game based on the Walking Dead. Which one would that fall under?
So correct, that would qualify as transmedia in the sense that you're having franchise awareness. But if those stories aren't necessarily the same story, if they're two different stories, if they don't speak to one another, that's when it gets a little. I mean, some folks believe that is transmedia. I believe that it is, but it's not a holistic necessarily experience, because you're not telling one single story throughout all of it. You're just creating more characters, creating greater awareness of those characters. I call it a fractured experience, meaning you're basically sharing the world of The Walking Dead, but you're using different platforms to do it, different ways in which people get into the franchise itself. But if it's a singular story throughout all of it, I would call it a singular transmedia experience, holistic, saying one thing. So, you know, some people have different definitions for those things, but that's how I've always been taught to think of it. That's how I've been hired to kind of create those types of experiences.
Okay, so one story across multiple platforms, that would be transmedia, but one, I guess, kind of like the Walking Dead universe, and you just have all these different stories, that would not be.
No, I would still qualify that as transmedia, but it would be a more fractured experience.
Fractured, okay.
Right. You don't have to do your homework in order to play the game and watch the TV show.
Sure.
It's exhausting. You don't have to go through all the different media platforms, but it's all a part of, or a lot of people are calling it world building these days, or immersion, immersive storytelling. You know, the terminology seems to change every 3 years. But all that plays into the same ideas. It's you just want to create your story across different platforms to create greater awareness. Fans love to consume that intellectual property, no matter what the medium is. It really is understanding where the fan base is going and exactly how you want to communicate that part of the universe to them.
Okay, well, let's take it back to the initial question. How did you get involved with writing for video games?
I was... So like I was telling you, it was the writer's strike of 2007, 2008, was bringing my eyes to different technological platforms at the time. But a year before that, actually, I was hired by a cognitive fitness company in Santa Monica, meaning basically they create brain games for and puzzle games for the elderly or people who are infirm or people who are cognitively compromised in some form or way, to basically create like memory games or a series of other very basic pattern games or trivia games. And the idea that they would use a technological platform to answer those questions, I loved solving those as a kid. I just really did. And it was basically my first experience working with software engineers and designers, even though the type of quote unquote video game was very different from what I would learn to be in the console world. So I really enjoyed that. And I wanted to create my own. And by the time I was understanding what was happening in the media space, in the media landscape, not outside of the writer's strike, you saw YouTube growing in popularity, you saw social media growing in popularity, and then of course you saw the iPhone, and you saw other technological platforms, mobile technological platforms, who are now able to share a movie with you or able to share media with you. So I looked at this as an opportunity to, when iPhone decided to open up their doors to independent devs for 2008, because 2007, I believe, was the launch date of the original iPhone, and 2008 was when they opened the doors to everybody else. I decided I wanted to create my own word game, and it was a Sudoku game. It was called Vokadoku, Vocabulary Sudoku, and the whole point was to answer a trivia question on vocabulary, appropriate if you're studying for the SATs or GREs or something like that. And if you answer it correctly, then you open up the grid to start playing Sudoku, at least make one single move within a cell to move forth. Prior to that experience, like immediately prior to that experience, I was working in the web world as well, working for a franchise called I've Got a Crush on Obama, which was a very big web viral video company. And they started doing their own advert game. Basically, it's a branding game, a browser game. It was like a dance-off between the top Democrats versus the top Republican candidates of 2008. And all I did was just basically write smack talk. But I really enjoyed, again, working with engineers. But as I saw video games becoming a larger and larger medium, and the opportunities to tell story from it potentially open to someone like myself who had never done it beforehand, I figured if I created my own game, save enough money to create my own game, work with devs, understand what it takes to create a video game, even if it's pretty lo-fi, then it will probably just make me a better candidate when I look for roles. And the way I looked for roles was at Comic-Con, GDC, introduce myself, tell them what my experience was. When the product finally came out in 2008, I had something to show to people. So it wasn't just my writing of my scripts and my episodes or whatever it was. I actually showed that, hey, I know what it's like being in the Fox den as well too. I know what it's like working at 3 o'clock in the morning with folks across the country. You know, I'm learning the language as I'm doing this, but I understand what designers need. I understand what engineers need. I understand that mindset, and I can create content based on that mindset. And that in many ways, with showing constant interest within the space and meeting other folks along the way and attending these conventions, again, Comic-Con, GDC, and other types of places. Eventually, I made friends with the folks, when Justin's former employer at Telltale Games, and the head of writing at the time just really liked where my experience was going. We maintained a good relationship over those years in which I met him and then developed the app. And he decided to give me a chance to write my very first console game through CSI Deadly Intent. So I had written for Law and Order, and I had created this game. It's like, okay, I think that, I don't know what his mindset is, but I imagine that's like, okay, this kid kind of understands what we do. He understands a lot of the hardships that we go through. So let's give this person a chance. And, you know, as Justin can probably tell you, I mean, it was probably the best people to learn how to write video games for.
Yeah.
Nice.
I had some weird experience where like there was the old guard when I was coming in, and then all the greats that were, everybody's like the legends, and then like within like 4 or 5 months they were all gone, and there's all these new people, and I was so sad. But those first 4 or 5 months were awesome. I just got like
That's
lots
awesome.
of great training from people like Dave Grossman. Was that his last name?
That's who exactly who it was. Yeah, he was
he's
absolutely awesome. He's just a really brilliant guy, a total gentleman.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes. Cool. Yeah. So let's chat about your books too, because I want to make sure that we cover those, and then your USC stuff. Don't want to leave any of that out.
Sure.
So you've learned a lot over the years. How many titles of games have you written now, do you think?
You know, I don't know. And I've also worked on a lot of are you going to call are you going to count the canceled titles, because those are a lot too, especially when you work directly for a publisher.
That's disheartening. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a lot. You know, it's definitely in the teens in some form or another.
Yeah, which is great for people who don't know. Like sometimes you work 4 or 5 years on a game, and then you finally get your 1 credit. So
and or you worked on like 5 different titles, they all got killed in various stages of greenlight, and then they're ready to go. And I say this to students, I say this to people who are interested in going into the space. I say, don't be discouraged if your first 5 years you don't see a title, you don't have a credit, because sometimes things get canceled, or oftentimes things get canceled.
Can you still put that on your resume? Obviously the company, but how would that work?
The company, but you don't put the product on there.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Be sad. I mean, I hear about Hollywood all the time.
If it was seen in E3 and there was certain kind of buzz to it, maybe you could, but I don't even know if there's.
Yeah. Or maybe you can mention it in the interview, just don't put it on paper.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because I mean, as you know, ship titles carry a lot of currency in the industry.
Yeah, there's always this question of how have you shipped a AAA game, and you're like, oh, what is AAA first of all? And yeah.
Right.
So yeah, so you have these books now. What caused you to decide to write these books, and have they achieved your dream, your goal with doing so?
I believe so. Yeah, but so I had just had a lot of people who found out that I had worked for Microsoft, found out I had worked for EA, found out I had written a single title for Meta or whatever the case may be, and it was students, or it was people switching careers, it was people interested in it but not necessarily wanting to be a writer in the medium. And so suddenly I just had like this baseline of knowledge that I just developed over time, and you know, things that were also related to projects that had nothing to do with the video game space, but there were similar best practices that were used or honed, or I had developed them working for another kind of product outside the game space, and then I took that skill set and put in the video game space successfully. But a lot of it had to do with developing my own game, even at a small scale of just some kind of small little app for the iPhone, and you know, developing different or solving for different kind of creative problems in the interactive space, if it was console, traditional video game, or otherwise. And I realized that there's so many different strategies to tell a good story, but a lot of times there's so many different strategies that when you're stuck and the story isn't working, or someone comes to you at the 11th hour and says, we need a story, we were too late in the game in creating it, help us fix this. So I've been brought on many times, oftentimes as a consultant, to help bridge that gap. Like, okay, you have these basic ingredients. How are we going to make this work when I got 3 months or 6 months? Or we might be shipping in 2 months. How are we going to do this? So with those kinds of pressure cooker situations, it just developed like these series of skill sets to help me navigate these storms, these torrential storms, because there can be very intense moments, no question. And people need your help, and you cannot let them down in any way. So what is it that we got to make this, we got to get this lifeboat, if you will, to shore and successfully. So that's where it came about. Several different angles there.
Nice. And I see that you have in the narrative design one a section on The Last of Us, breaking it down. So that must be fun to be watching the show after.
It is.
Clearly
it is. You know, and I hadn't analyzed it in like 7 years, but it's great seeing the TV series. I'm like, oh yes. I remember, oh, this is this is the version. Oh, this is beautifully done. Oh, this is really well done. They did this in a really great cinematic way for television. You know, it's a really good homage. I don't know if that's the right term in this particular situation. They pay great respect to the original subject matter.
Yeah,
and take it further without in many ways undermining or overshadowing the original IP.
Nice. Yeah. And then so for people who are looking at these books, and on so it looks like the first one you wrote completely, right? And then the second one you were an editor / did some writing, of course.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, it's an edited edition. I wrote the beginning and the end, and then basically kind of like set the goals that I wanted each writer to go after, and then of course edited their works along the way. And so it came up to me because the idea came to me because I had written for so many different kinds of media. It'd be awesome just to get best practices once again shared into a book, similar to the dramatic story and narrative design thing. But I wanted the points of view of other creators in the field. So I reached out to folks who were, and I had pretty much done a lot of what was already written in the game, but a lot of these folks went many steps further than I did. And they're phenomenal writers. And, you know, just getting their points of view was very enlightening for me. And I knew it was going to be very educational for writers who are interested in different media to learn how to do so from these writers.
Yeah, really cool. When you decide to do the one that includes NFTs and Web3s, then I'm on the docket.
Okay. Sounds good. I've got apparently they're going to do a second edition of the first book.
Oh, cool.
So the second one will come about too in a few years. Well, fingers crossed. So.
There you go. Awesome. Yeah. And then last from me before I head back over to Paul to see if he has any follow-ups is so the USC thing. How did that come about? Did these books help, do you think, in that discussion, or did they come up to help you land the gig, and what else would involve there?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe the first book did, especially with the person who's in charge of the program there, who had read my book and was thinking about potentially teaching it in one of his writing classes. And when he approached me for the summertime, he was kind of, I don't want to say changing his mind. He's like, well, why don't we have you teach? And it's a workshop class, okay, that leads up to a larger lecture that he oversees. And the lecture every week has a new, different, amazing speaker coming in who's done a lot in terms of writing for games.
That's awesome.
And otherwise, but yeah, my goal is primarily to, you know, there's a prescribed syllabus, and it's getting the students to get where they need to be to evolve for an original IP. And writing in towards that effort, all the various different things that need to be written before you actually write a full-on script, or before you write a full-on spreadsheet in Excel. What are the steps that you need to do to go along the way? It's a great class.
Have you started teaching the class yet?
Yeah. In August. Starting in August. Yeah.
Oh, well, cool. So how much of this is one thing I've always thought about. I always thought, it'd be so fun to go teach, but how much of your creative space, mind, mental, physical, has it taken up?
You know, I manage it well. You know, I've got other things that are going on. So when it comes to my own personal writing, sometimes I have to hit the pause button in order to service other clients or other kinds of publisher needs or something like that. I've been pretty busy with the publishing stuff this year, and getting towards the end of a couple of things now. Once that starts to be off my queue, then I can get back to my personal writing, because I also write short stories. I've been doing a lot of that since COVID hit and getting some of those published.
Nice. Really cool. With magazines, or what do you do with them?
Actually, an anthology. There's this
Oh, cool.
one particular author, one particular editor, the Tulip Tree Anthology. She's based in the Midwest. Has been a wonderful advocate of my writing, and it's
Great.
been really great to get that validated and last since 2020.
Nice. And a good point there is, if you decide to do novels someday, I don't know if you already have or not, but going out to those authors that you've been published with in the anthologies and like asking, about blurbs or author shares, that helps, because you're already linked together and probably branded in a similar way.
Great advice. Thank you.
Yeah. Have you written novels? Are you thinking about novels?
I have not. I have. Yeah, I am thinking about it, but I haven't. I know you have. You're in the fantasy realm, right?
Fantasy, sci-fi, yeah. And a lot of my sci-fi is just pretending to be sci-fi, and it's actually fantasy. So yeah.
Right.
And did you study filmmaking as well?
No, I studied theater. I studied playwriting.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll go back to Paul. Paul, any follow-ups from all that?
Just two, because I was looking at some of the titles you've worked on, and I noticed that action and comedy tend to really kind of like be the dominant labels on a lot of the titles you've worked on. Is that just a genre you really enjoy working on? Does it just come naturally, or was it kind of like, hey, I actually have a flair for this. I really want to work on these more?
I think a lot of it has to do with what your friends are working on, and they trust you to help them with really hard problems. I can't say I necessarily have a flair of one over the other. I just do my homework. Once I'm going to be approaching something, okay, what are the other greats doing in this field, and how can I basically do what they do, but in this, in the lens of this game, or in the lens of this IP. Yeah, so it's a lot of homework, making sure I'm getting the voice properly. And it's funny, because if we're starting from scratch and completely new IP, intellectual property, a tone document is really important, and write samples beforehand so people understand exactly how these characters speak, or what's the iconography that needs to be used that fits within the overall tone of the whole experience.
Has anyone ever come to you say, Ross, we can't use that?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's like, and mostly the case, well, the character wouldn't speak like this. It's not because I'm doing something that's in violation of localization rules or government compliance, but more so just because they're really thinking the nuance of the character. I don't know if they would write that. I don't know if they would say that.
And I assume you're just kind of like, okay, it's no problem to change. Has that really ever kind of like thrown you off balance? Like, oh wait, but this, but that kind of ruins this whole storyline I came up with.
If it changes a story beat, if you already have a tight structure and they say, we got to get rid of this, like for an entire cutscene, let's say, or another narrative mechanism that delivers a certain important plot point, and that has to be removed because the level's removed, that's when the architecture comes in, and you almost have to revamp everything that you wrote beforehand, kind of accommodate the lost information that's still necessary to the entire structure and through line of the piece. So how do you properly distribute that narrative information that just got cut? That's where you got to think differently. Those are the particular challenges I've faced.
Wow, that sounds pretty intense. And what I was gonna say, one of the things we were talking about just before we started today, that you're getting ready to go back to the East Coast for it's not a seminar, and it's a conference.
Right, it's a conference. That's right. That's the word I didn't use. That's exactly what it is. It's a conference. That's right. That's right.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about that, because I think it's a very interesting topic.
Sure. Yeah. So the author Philip Roth, who passed away in 2018, would have turned 90 on March 19th. So in commemoration of his 90th birthday, the Philip Roth Society and Newark Public Library is hosting 3 conferences. One is for the first 3 days is more academic based, and that's the one I'm part of, even though I'm not a traditional academic. And then the last 3 days are devoted to performing arts. A lot of actors are going to be coming in, doing adaptations of his work as a stage play or as a film, as there have been many of his works being done. The Plot Against America, for instance, was a miniseries on HBO, I believe, last year. And I believe there's a stage adaptation in the works for one of his books called Sabbath Theater. So I'll be presenting some in the first 3 days, and mine is somewhat of a memoir. of how his work meant a lot to me during my early days as a writer. When I was in college and graduate school, how I experienced writer's block when I was in graduate school and needed to get my thesis done. How I basically, how his work helped me, not necessarily from a craft perspective, but from an emotional perspective. You know, I was carrying the baggage of a family issue that was a longstanding family issue, and just reading his work, while it wasn't identical to my particular issue, there was a certain kind of rawness, how character relates to others when a trauma happens, that was almost psychologically identical to my experience. Even though the facts were different, it's just the emotional reaction was so similar. There's like, whoa, I've met the author who I can rely on during tough moments. So it's a kind of a memoir, if you will. It's about those experiences, encountering his work in my early 20s.
This sounds great. And it's coming up in just a couple of weeks in Newark, New Jersey.
That's right. Not a little less than that. That's right. It's in a couple of weeks. That's right. Yeah.
All right. And this which is good, because by the
or
time
next week.
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay, this might post after that, but just in case someone's there, hey, I've still got 2 days left.
Right.
Okay. That's great. I don't have any more questions. This was really fascinating stuff. And again, like I said, I don't really know much about the writing for video games industry, but I mean, Justin's very knowledgeable. And I mean, some of your books sound like they'd be extremely helpful for somebody like me who's just trying to break in.
And they're basically written for folks who are completely new to the industry. That was the intention. You know, I didn't go too much into the weeds, because that's a different kind of story. I'm sorry, that's a different approach.
Right.
You know, I'm sure Justin might read it, say, you know, been there, done that kind of thing. And it's like, that's okay, because it's more so for folks like, you know, again, students or people want to switch careers. What are the best practices and things to help? And I do talk about trends of the future, things to watch out for, that kind of stuff, which in my second edition, I'll have to update it just a little bit more, because there's new trends that are popping up as is expected.
Which book or which title would you recommend for, again, like for somebody like me, just totally new, just kind of looking to find out a little bit more about it? Which title of yours would you suggest starting with?
Well, dramatic storytelling and narrative design. Would you mind if I showed it?
Oh, yeah, sure, please.
Okay.
We're all about the visual aids.
I don't know if you can see that.
It's blurred up for some reason.
Oh, it's a little blurry. Back it up.
Okay.
It's like they're blurring it on purpose or something.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because it's your head. Block it in front of your head again. Let me see.
Oh, there it is. Dramatic storytelling and narrative design. Writer's Guide to Video Game something.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, if you're someone who's interested in games, that's what it's all about. You know, the other one is more so if you're interested in writing for a ride at Disney World, or an interactive toy, or a board game, or a hybrid board game, not a chatbot, but a Siri type of experience, a mobile game, and others. You know, I've found great colleagues who wrote really fantastic work on those individual topics. And like I said, I learned a ton. Even when I worked in those things, there's more that I learned that just made me potentially a more aware professional. And that's a very special book as well too. And again, it just came out in June, so I'm just trying to build, you know, more of awareness of it. But I'm very much indebted to the authors who participate in that, because they were very generous with their time and their insight, and those individual articles are just real standouts.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Russ, where could people find you online if they want to get in touch and find out more?
You can check me out on LinkedIn. I'm in the process of starting a website. So when that happens, hopefully when this, well, it might be too late for that, but LinkedIn is definitely an opportunity to see me, a good opportunity to talk with me, chat with me. And yeah, once I have a website, maybe I can add it onto a better date onto your podcast. But that's what we're doing right now.
That's great.
Awesome. And are you going to GDC this year?
I am. I'm going to be there yes, I'm going to be there, I think Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that. Yeah, because I have a book signing for the new book, Storytelling.
Okay.
Are you going to be there?
No, but I was thinking we'll probably post this right around that time. So that'll be an opportune moment to be like, hey, if you're there, go say hi to Ross.
Awesome. I appreciate it. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully next year. I got to arrange more in advance. And yeah.
Well, aren't you in the San Francisco? Aren't you in?
Oh, not anymore. No, we moved to LA 4 years ago. So,
well, we have to have coffee because I'm in LA.
Oh, cool. Yeah, let's meet up. That'd be great.
Awesome.
There you go. Cool. You heard it here, people. Ladies and gentlemen, if he hasn't met me for coffee within a year, then you got to blame him. Cool. Awesome, Ross. Well, it's been great having you on, and appreciate it so much. Readers, go check out the books and give them some reviews, because those always help authors, and we love it. And also our own books. Both Paul and I have stuff on there, so we'll give our little outro now. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Also, leave reviews for the podcast, share word of mouth, all that. I'm Justin Sloan.
And I'm Paul Zeidman. You can check out my screenwriting blog, Maximum Z, at maximumz.blog. And my Go Ahead and Ask books about screenwriting and writing for various mediums and Pi. Those are on Amazon as well. And also on Twitter at maximum_Z. Like he said, he's Justin. That's Russ. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.